and it connects to our user data service. So this is SOAP. This is SOAP. So from a template perspective or a class perspective, basically we've got entitlements. It requires user data service, web service, get authorized features web service, and a JDBC connection to our database. Right? So that's right there. We know, okay, how do we configure that? Whenever we push it to any of those environments, what's the required configuration, and then how is it addressed, right? How do we get to it in those environments? So whenever we're planning, we have to say, okay, for dev, right? So for dev, what are those configurations? For the hint environment, whatever it is. And for HQA, that same list that we have drawn out for video visits, right? So we need for each of the environments to define those configurations, right? Okay. So, and then for each of those environments, we need to say for entitlements, how do I get to it? So I guess one is if I use this as my entrance. So what's my URL to that environment? And then what is the body of configs I need for dev for entitlements? So this is entitlements. Right, so what's my entry point? And then what are my configurations?
Right.
That's where we have to start planning. Okay?
So the entitlement, you're calling it as a Java class?
This is a SOAP web service.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So look at this to me right now. This is our we're a service provider, right? So we are. This is where we host our services, right? So this is our hosting servers that we have to config, right? So we're deploying into WebSphere application server. We need to know the JDBC connectivity for entitlements in Dev 1. And again, what complicates it more is in the context of a certain release, right? So Dev 1 may be for, so I'll call it Dev 1, whatever. So whenever I put the X, each of the X's may have a different set of configurations. It may, right? So X means I'm using it in the context of release A. Or if I get a different value for my X, then I'm in the context of release B. Right? So those releases may have different connectivity requirements.
Right. So in case of JDBC, those connectivity requirements would not change, right? The database connection,
the database,
user ID, password,
it would change.
Host name and password,
yes,
user ID?
Yes.
Okay.
So we might have a different instance of the database.
Oh.
So when you say DevX, that's an entire. It's a cluster of saying this is the DevX.
So for every release, you have a different infrastructure.
Yes.
Yes. Exactly.
The instances of that.
So the database, the database is sort of a common component to the apps and the services. So when we say, DevX, so let's say X is what we're doing, and X is for release A, then there'll be a certain database assigned that we use in Dev into HQA. These two are using the same database, but then we change it here. You guys will start to get a feel for that, right? About how we leverage certain components throughout a release cycle.
Just to add to that, so why is it important? So, for example, you could have the entitlement service and a specific script that is needed to be run for a specific release. So the consumer is expecting certain database entries in a particular release. So when you say this release is going in Dev X, when somebody is testing it, they say, why am I not seeing this? Was the database script run? So we always have this kind of challenge in saying, oh, did you run this script? Oh, did you run this script? So the database is specific in that dev instance and in that hint instance. So sometimes when you want to regress and go back, you need to say undo that database change. So knowing what state you are, just the database itself is different in each environment, and you need to do it.
So let me ask this. I'm sorry. So you're saying, oh, why this script did not run or did not work? is that happening in production or in pre-production?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. So as part of
any one of these.
it can happen anywhere. So when we do a release, you're deploying both the Java classes and the web service.
I
That
see.
is also inclusive of running the database script. So for some reason, if that gets dropped because it's assumed or got missed, then you don't know and you're troubleshooting.
Yeah, I got that.
Okay, so just there's a couple things how do we communicate this stuff, right? So, but before we go there, I just wanted to add a little more complexity. So we also have, on many of our services, we also have an API layer. So here's the entitlements API. And it's basically, it's talking SOAP, but out from it, it's basically talking REST.
So because this is what I was talking about, Wordell, the layer that Axway Wordell, which we use there, that's what that is.
X-ray.
Axway.
Right, and this is all J2E containers, J2E, right? So WAS. So typically we have this model, right? So stuff is SOAP here or REST here, but then we serve it up to our mobile devices via a gateway. But so when we're planning, we have to identify. So this is so then there's another layer. So here's the URL into this environment, and there's another URL into this environment, another URL into this environment, right? So
And this is specific for each release.
this is one release as it
Yeah.
progresses through the environment. Exactly. So for the next release, so this all sort of unrolls here. So if the next release requires a new version of entitlements, then there'll be a new URL. If the next release environment doesn't require a new version of entitlements, then it's the same URL, right? So we have to be aware of what the application needs are, the changes that are coming through the pipeline to determine if for this next release environment, so dev Y and hint Y, we need a new version of a given service or not, right? So and we'll talk about how to get there in a little bit. Before I get there, I wanted to give you one more layer. So
Excuse me, Mr. How early do you have it defined?
So that's going to be NCAT's job to help figure out how we define it, right? So we need to work with our app team. So right now, our app team say stuff like, I need the entitlements version for November. I need to change that behavior. And part of that is going to require our team to change and then their team to change. They need to say, I need entitlement version 2.3.4. Right? Well, why do you need that? Well, I know because the release notes, my functionality needs are in there. That's what we need to get to. Then when the app teams know that, we can start to build a plan, right? So we need to help. Initially, we're going to have to train them to say, I need this. And if we don't have a version number for them, then we have to get that. Otherwise, we're not enabling them to know what they're consuming, right? So the idea is that, so I'll transition there first. What we need to start saying is, we need release manifests, right? So we need to know for a given release, what are the service versions we're deploying, and why are we deploying them? We're deploying them for 5 applications, and these 5 applications each know what they need, right? That drives our manifests for deployment, because they're saying, I have a manifest for my functional capabilities, right? So that would drive us knowing, okay, these things are going to be in a given release. And if nobody needs entitlement, I mean, everybody always needs entitlement changes, but actually entitlements doesn't always change, the database does, right? So there could
Correct.
be scripting work underneath it that we have to track, but the entitlement version and the URLs would probably stay the same, right? So, but one other thing before we go down that path is that we also have a Data Power ESB. And an enterprise standard is that we always call SOAP-based web services via our ESB. And even RESTful web services that are not exposed to our clients. So we service consumers. So Kaiser has, think of it as an audience. And our audience that we primarily support in our organization is consumers. Consumers are our customers that are like our members caregivers, a prospective member, those are consumers. That's who we serve up interfaces and support them. That's we're not exclusive to that, but that's our focus. But things that are not going out to them, that are RESTful, or RESTful services that we call, that might live on our back-end systems, we call them via data power. And data power gets, you can envision another endpoint, right? Think about it here, right? For entitlements, I've got an endpoint for each of these environments, right? So if this is the same, I guess I should do it this way. Okay, so let's forget that. So then I've got, for entitlements specifically, right? What that says is, I'm going to go through the bus, and to get to the bus, I have a separate URL. Then we have a mapping in a registry, a SOAP registry called WebSphere Registry and WebSphere Registry and Repository. We have a mapping that says, okay, when you come into this endpoint, you're going to get to that service. That's called a managed service in Wizard speak, and this is a client-facing service. So sort of the client or the data power endpoint gets configured and maps to this managed endpoint. Basically, the managed endpoints are WAS deployment. Our service is hosted on a WAS container. That is what this URL is. It's how I address it without any bus. And then our data power endpoint is our bus public endpoint that applications call. So part of our planning will feed that registry configuration. Right? Our planning says, okay, I need a data power endpoint, and here's the managed endpoint it's going to connect to for this environment. Right? So we have ways to identify, and the bus team has worked with us to say, okay, you can put a question mark and then this, and that'll get you. We'll make sure you route to that managed endpoint. Right? Or question mark this, and we'll get to that endpoint. Okay, so there's ways, and
Part of the parameter.
you'll see that. Yeah, you'll see that. So, and then to take that even a little bit further, to some of the complexity that you saw in the video visits, is then when we connect to say HCOT, which is a KP Health Connect environment. So KP Health Connect, that is our EMR, electronic medical record, right? So that supports all of our facilities and our clinics. When you go and you get care, the doctors are sitting there updating the system. That's what they're updating. KP Health Connect, also known as Epic, as the system provider, the vendor. That we have lots of web services that are hosted there, and our Health Connect environment has 7 regions, because we have 7 regions. So a lot of times, what I want to get to, so they're a service provider, so they're doing similar things as us here, right? So they're going to say, okay, I have a web service needed by this group, needed by any group. I'm going to host it somewhere, not in our world, but they have a set of servers themselves. They host it, and then they'll do the same thing. Data power endpoint, and they'll have a mapping to their managed endpoints. Okay. Some of the complexity comes in, particularly when we go to regional environments. So when we go to regional environments, we need to route to different instances. So this has 7 regional instances, right? It's not really 7, it's really 5 plus 6. I'm just going to use this, plus 6. That's a little confusing, but what it says is 5 of our regions have one place, one server that supports them. So this is like Colorado, Hawaii,
Northwest,
Georgia. And what else? 1, 2, 3. Mid-Atlantic. So those regions, they have one instance of the EMR running. No matter what facility you go to, one instance.
Okay.
In SCAL and NCAL, there's 6 instances serving those regions.
because those regions are large. They are the largest.
So this is NCAL. That's So they all have different test environments. They choose where they want to host our non-prod service for doing our regional testing. HREG1 is Health Regional Environment. Regional environments, we have routing rules. So we work with the people who provide services here to define what those routing rules are. So we have, we have that parameter into data power to get into our world. They have a parameter that we pass to them that we help define routing rules to get to the right instances for UAT and regional tests. You don't need to focus on this, that's more of an FYI right now. At some point we'll get there.
Okay.
But again, it's more about we abstract that away from the applications by putting it into routing rules that data power uses, right?
Quick question, Jeff. For consumer acceleration, are we going to, what is the Health Connect that we are getting to? Are we going to do it in one national certification or regional?
We'll always end up in a regional. So we'll be national. We'll do all our development, just like really anything else, right? We'll develop national.
Like Express Second, we'll do it in national and we'll take it to WITS 3
There'll
or
be a regional-
there'll be a regional.
Exactly, there'll be a regional test.
But are we going to do multiple regions or?
Multiple.
Okay.
So for consumer acceleration, we'll be doing all regions.
You know, I'll give him the context later and say where it needs to get
And the
deployed.
limitations will be driven, or the restrictions will be driven by our application features and entitlements, where
Got
again, a
it.
region may not be on board for our release date. Right?
Got it.
So we typically develop to go everywhere. We don't always test in everything, but the idea is that every region will test when they're going to go live. And if they are all going live at the same time, we have a way to tell the app, hey, for Hawaii, we're not doing this. So just disable it so that it doesn't show up in the UI in some way.
Okay.
Because our regions are like 7 different businesses, they all don't function in lockstep. They don't. They just never on anything. So we have to have ways to support development to move forward, but yet and going to production, even if some regions aren't ready to go live with us, based on their constraints. So this is a big dump, guys, but so basically you can see already this is one service is already looking really complex, right? We've got about 30 services. Okay, so and we don't have any real structured planning going on right now, so that's what I'm bringing you to help us. What's a good way to lay it out? What's a good way to map it out? And then what's a good way to a process to keep it going, right? So that we don't let it fall apart.
What do you mean by saying one service and 30 service? What do you mean by that?
I'm saying this looks pretty complicated, right? And we define we're just looking at one service, right? We have 30 of these.
Okay.
So that we need to sort of know at any given point what are the data power endpoints that say our clients, our applications should be using.
Good one.
So to layer all on this, once we
So the entitlement is hosted in Kaiser's network, and that is also going via data power for all the calls, or you said
yes.
Okay.
So if you could take this and stick it here, right?
Okay.
So this is almost like the class side, and this is like the instance side, right?
Okay.
It's just saying I've got an entitlement service. Here's the things it needs to connect to, and then I take this with a environment configuration and I plop it in here.
Okay.
Right? And then I deploy. Ideally, we're trying to work with another team to get automated deployments going using Urban Code, so that once we define this, when we define it, ideally it's in a XML or some human readable file that we can then automate to stick it in there. All the J2E configs, deploying the ear, and a little smoke test. If it needed that database script we talked about, that deployment should run that first, or have a way to check to see that it was run.